Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in today for our small business panel discussion. I would like to take some time to introduce our four panel members. First up, we have Justin, the CEO at REM Surface Engineering in Austin, Texas. Justin, would you like to give a little bit of background about yourself and REM?
Sure. So REM works in the metal surface finishing industry. We've been a part of manufacturing for over 50 years. A lot of work in the aerospace industry. Got pulled into additive manufacturing a little over 10 years ago, and do a lot in that space. My role on the day-to-day currently spend a lot of time in the R&D side, working with some of our government contracts and things like that. So any of the questions that I answer today are really going to be focused fully through the metal lens. So just something to keep in mind as we have this discussion.
Next up, we have Tracy Albers, the president and CTO at RPNM out of Westlake, Ohio.
Thanks, Stephanie. Tracy Albers, I run Rapid Prototype and Manufacturing. We're a contract manufacturer. Been a member of America Makes for quite a while now. We're one of the founding members, actually, of the organization. RG+M mainly focuses on utilizing FDM technology to service the aerospace and defense industry. So over the last year or so, almost entirely our business has been focused on aerospace and defense. So we spent a lot of time working on repeatability and working with SAE and others to develop specifications around how to standardize use of these technologies for a true manufacturing setting. So happy to be on the panel. Thanks for having me.
We have Sarah, the founder of Fab Lab Hubs out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Sarah?
Thanks so much, America Makes staff, for putting us together, even though it's virtual. I founded Fab Lab Hub as my third startup to do contract manufacturing, but mostly to support our nonprofit New Color network that does workforce training in new color jobs, such as 3D printing technicians, robotics technicians, CAD designers. I come from manufacturing. I was the co-founder of Potomac Photonics. We invented and manufactured a 193 nanometer and 248 nanometer excimer laser that was used in micro manufacturing as well as laser machining eyeballs, and we developed the laser for LASIK eye surgery, as well as laser machine tools. We had a contract manufacturing group that did high volume manufacturing for microelectronics, defense, Air Force in particular, for medical device and a number of other consumer products like Apple. And what I'm delighted to do now that I am part of the MIT Fab Lab network is to create pathways to engaging, well-paying jobs for people without a college degree in these fields. And thanks to America Makes, we developed a digital badge micro certification program in Additive. And it's been a really great journey, and we're starting to see the world adapt how we train technicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And last up is Melanie Lang, the CEO of Form Alloy out of San Diego, California. Melanie?
Hi, good afternoon. Happy to be here today. At Form Alloy, we design and manufacture directed energy deposition systems. If you don't know what that is, it's a metal additive manufacturing process that utilizes powder as a feedstock and laser as the energy source and builds the parts up layer by layer. I'd be happy to talk to you more about the process. But we design and manufacture those systems, and then we also do services in-house as well. So as Justin alluded to, I will also be focused on metals in any of the answers that I give today. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'd just like to remind everybody, this is about inhibitors and enablers for greater adoption of additive manufacturing in small businesses. So any questions that you have, if everyone can utilize the Q&A tab when you enter your questions, if you want to direct anything at one of the particular panelists, please include that in your question and we'll make sure to get that over to them. But I'd like to first kick this off by posing a question to Justin and asking, how does additive manufacturing change or affect a small business's ability to compete with larger competitors?
Thanks, Stephanie. So I think additive offers some really unique opportunities right now, specifically in the government funding space. There's a lot of interest, NASA, the Air Force, the DoD, in additive manufacturing for a variety of applications. And as such, there's a lot of what's called SBIRs, or Small Business Innovation and Research Grants, that are out there. My company had never done one of these before 3 years ago. I had some connections at NASA. There was some interest there, and we submitted our first one. We've now gotten about like 9, I think, in process. And what these are, this is non-dilutive funding opportunities, whereby the government's going to provide you with funding to provide a specific set of deliverables that you've proposed to them that they have found interesting. And you can go from a phase 1 to a phase 2, and then potentially even onto a phase 3, where it's an ongoing program contract. So there's a lot that can be done with that. It's, as a small business, we're not taking a lot of, speculative $1 million bets on things, right? That's not who we are. Large companies can do that. This allows you to do some of these things, and it's allowed us specifically to advance some of like our different alloy finishing capabilities and some of the scale at which we're processing parts quite considerably, and it's opened a lot of doors. So I think it's because there is this interest, because there are these potential value that the government sees here. You have opportunities there that you don't necessarily have in the traditional space, if you're, say, like a machine shop or whatnot.
I would like to address this to the panel and talk about what are the largest obstacles, the biggest barriers of entry for a small business relative to additive. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and kick that off.
Well, there are several things. One that is really close to what we do is workforce. And I remember at Rapid the year that HP entered the market with their production 3D printer, and you'd be at a coffee break or at a reception, and the buzz was, I'd love to have one of those HP machines, but I don't have anybody who can run it. And I think workforce training is a really important part of it. I think the other big barrier coming from production manufacturing is a lack of understanding in small businesses about what it's like to actually go from prototype to high volume production, and the kinds of requirements that customers have when you're starting to really enter serious markets. And I know that Melanie's work in the aerospace industry, I worked quite extensively in the medical device industry. When you're talking about answering to the FAA or the FDA, and then with customers who you have serious safety concerns, it takes it to another whole level. And it's much more than just buying a machine and being able to make a prototype, but it's having people who understand GMP. It's people who can adhere to Lean and ISO practices and can take it to the next level. And I think those are barriers for small businesses.
Yeah, Stephanie, I could echo Sarah's thoughts a little bit. I think, and I said this years ago, and you hate to, relive your prophecies. I feel like I might be too young to be doing that, but let's go for it anyways. When I first started working in this industry, I came from a very traditional manufacturing company, and kind of came into additive with the goal of trying to figure out how to not treat it like something different, right? So when you're talking to companies that have specified processes and you're trying to fill the gap, I was describing to the team earlier, the auditor that's coming doesn't care what kind of machine you use. They care about you following a process and controlling your process and ensuring that when you do things the first time, it's the same as when you do it the 150th time. So I guess I'm a proponent for let's stop treating additive as a separate manufacturing technology and rather just call it mainstream manufacturing. It's our job as users of the technology to help our customers and peers find the right applications for the right technology. But more importantly than that, find the right process that controls so that, the companies that we all want to help along the way and help use additive in their mainstream manufacturing system don't feel like they have to treat it like something different, right? So we need to treat it like a grown-up manufacturing technology that it's trying so hard to be, and less as a prototyping tool where we do things once and then we don't really care about what happens the second time.
Yeah, and the thing that I would like to add there is that some of that responsibility is on the people side, which I think is a lot what Sarah and Tracy were just discussing. It's a culture and a training and a people thing and a process thing. On the OEM side, there's also things that we can do to make the machines more usable and more repeatable that will support the people and the processes that will basically drive this. And what I mean by that is, if you have a machine that requires a PhD or a material scientist to stand at the machine and stare at it and make tweaks as you go, one, you will always run into that issue of not having someone to run the machine as you expand and grow. But two, every time that the operator interacts with that machine and makes a change, you have lost your repeatability, to feed into what Tracy just said. So as an OEM, it's our responsibility to make our machines usable so that way they run like a standard machine tool, so that way you can then follow those processes like Tracy's mentioning, which should go across any type of manufacturing, whether it's traditional or additive. And with that, the machines have to be, smart enough to know when something goes awry, be able to detect that, and not rely on that operator to be standing at the machine and making changes.
That is a really good point. And there was a book many years ago written by a guy named Jeff Moore in Silicon Valley called Crossing the Chasm. And it's still relevant today. And what he talked about was, in order to be successful in mainstream markets, you needed to develop products that went from just what you're describing, the tweaking by the PhDs, to being able to have technicians run it. And he was talking about all kinds of markets, so consumer as well as industrial. But if any of you haven't read it, it's really a very, very good analysis of what OEMs need to do. And that was one of the big things we had to do with LASIK, because we were developing an excimer laser that used fluorine gas for ophthalmologists. And so that's a totally different ball game when you're dealing with somebody who is not a physicist. And I think you just hit the nail on the head there.
That's interesting, Sarah. And to build on kind of Melanie's comments and Tracy's comments, I think we also have to recognize what's different about additive manufacturing, and specifically in my case, metal additive manufacturing compared to traditional machining, right? It's not just a forming technology, right? You're creating your metallurgy in situ, right? You're creating grain structures. All these things are going on. If you're just a machine shop, you're not having to worry about those sorts of things, right? These are typically very well-established processes. You're coming from bar stock. We're coming from powder here, right? There's a lot more that needs to go on. And I think that's one of the key barriers folks need to understand and recognize, is that it does require more investment. It does require more skilled individuals, both the technician side, and on the PhD side. There's just a lot that goes into it, and it's a great technology. It's got an amazing promise, but you don't just walk into it, by buying a machine and now you're a print shop. It's not quite that it's not quite that simple. It's much more complex.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that has come up. What creative financing ideas can manufacturers implement for small businesses?
Well, going back to our LASIK experience, the ophthalmologists don't buy LASIK machines. We charged, the industry charged per operation. And for many of the ophthalmologists, the expense of going UV photons are very expensive to produce versus IR photons. It really enables them to look at things differently. Also, and I think we can learn from the mistakes and the advances that other industries have made. And one of the really clever things was there were 4 patents. And at the beginning, all of the LASIK people were fighting over, you know, who was going to win and how was this going to work. And eventually they got together and actually collaborated and came up with a partnership. It was called PurePoint Partners. And they all put all their patents into this pool, and then it enabled the industry to go forward. And I think more of that kind of creative thinking and that innovative thinking is what we need to help small businesses who maybe can't afford a metal printer.
And that's good. That alludes back to the program manager from the U.S. Air Force earlier that said, if everybody, instead of shouting, everybody kind of sings together, we can make a choir. So that's good. And I think, you know, with that, there are, you know, service providers that will sort of help you with that initial sort of delve into additive, do some feasibility studies for you, do some low rate manufacturing. To help you create that business case and make sure you can justify those purchases. Because yeah, if you haven't done any additive manufacturing ever and you're not familiar with it, if you go out and you buy a machine, you might not get the right machine because there's an entire ecosystem of different technologies, and you have to sort of look at your application and pick your technology. So if you're not quite sure, it might be worth trying out some different technologies, you know, going through service providers, either a service bureau or even you know, a lot of OEMs will offer some services to help identify, and most OEMs will tell you if their technology is not a good fit for what you're trying to do. They will tell you, because it's in no one's best interest to sell a machine and then have it be a paperweight. And so, you know, with that, you know, just don't be shy. You know, if you have parts you're looking into that you're considering, you know, reach out to some OEMs or some service providers and ask what they would recommend, and try to narrow down the technology a little bit, and then maybe get some test parts printed from that technology before you decide to purchase something.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this earlier. You don't need to make all the mistakes we already have. So we can help you find, and I think there's other, you know, I'm looking at the audience a little bit, there's other folks that are in a similar spot. I mean, when RPNM was originally found, we had the unique philosophy, well, I guess not unique at the time, but the philosophy of if you have one of every type of machine, you'll have a huge customer base and you can be an expert at everything. The reality is, you know, in an industry where there's innovation every day, the previous speaker was just talking about, like, you know, checking, I mean, all of us that are spending our lives in this general industry get a new email, like, invest in this company, we're doing this differently, you know, our machine does this differently, and you know, solve some unique part of the supply chain issue in additive. The reality is that there's a lot of information out there, and it's hard to make judgments on what the right machine is for your particular application. And it's very expensive to try and do everything or have direct experience in everything. So finding a partner, contract manufacturer, consultant, expert that's done some of this before and can help guide you into the right combination of design and material and machine will avoid a lot of excess capital expenditures. If you communicate with any of the used machine brokers, they will gladly also tell you some sob stories about making purchases that maybe didn't work out in the end for the user. So there's lots of us out there that can help with those sorts of things. We've done it before, so we can give you our expertise and help you make the right decision.
You know, along those lines, when you talk about making a mistake on a machine, often I visit companies, and I was visiting so many companies through the New England Lean Consortium, and they would say to me, oh, please come and look at our 3D printer. We think we need a better one. And typically they would have spent $50,000 or $100,000, and you know, and this was like 10 years ago. And I'd go look at it, and the problem was not the printer. The problem was they had nobody who had the time to figure out how to run it. And I suggested to the one in particular that was near Brown University that they go over and get a kid from the engineering department and have an intern. And they called me 3 months later and they said, you saved us a fortune, because Within 3 months, this kid got us the kinds of parts we were looking for. They were a jewelry manufacturer. They made the Super Bowl rings, and they needed a lot of molds. And I think that, again, going back to that concept of the complete product that Intel's Bill Davidow used to talk about, it's not just buying the machine, it's having the expertise that Tracy's talking about. It's having the people who can run it. It's having all of the support that goes around it in addition to the actual piece of equipment.
I agree, Sarah. And I mean, the reaffirming thing now is that, you know, not only are we able to do that, but we are, you know, as an industry, we are now at the point where the major users of additive technologies are coming to their manufacturing partners with a plan, right? So they're saying, I want to use XYZ technology, whatever that may be. I want this material. I want you to run it against this specification, and I want you to prove to me that you can do it exactly how I would like it. And I want to audit you against that, and then I want you to deliver parts on my schedule. So kudos to all of us who've spent, you know, the last 10 or so years of our lives thinking about this, but we're there now, which is a huge accomplishment. So, you know, for machines that were created 30 years ago, and the impetus at the time was, let's make one part and we will reduce product life cycles because we're going to help innovators innovate new things and then realize the actual part. Now we are making production level parts for serious requirements for industries that are not for the faint of heart, and we're doing that successfully. So, you know, for those of you who maybe haven't experienced the full supply chain of what additive can do, we are now living in that moment. And I'm not sure that I could have said that even maybe 3 years ago, but I think that that is definitely real and definitely happening. And it's happening on the polymer end, it's happening on the metals end. So, you know, and I know there's a lot of marketing-ish stories out there, but from someone who's, you know, seeing the day-to-day activity around that, I can tell you that we definitely have come a long way in the last decade.
So after that, what role or function are small businesses best equipped to play in the additive manufacturing ecosystem? Where do you think they fit in with this technology? So Justin, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So from my perspective, I think small businesses are best equipped to play specialized support roles in the AM industry. Again, kind of keep it from the metal perspective. I think you've got some very large players out there, a lot of OEMs that get a lot of expertise, and they know what they want to do. But you also have a lot of folks in there that perhaps are not coming with that, 10 years of experience, and that they need some support. And I think small businesses with flexibility, with some of our ability to be, a bit more customer focused in terms of meeting their needs, working with them as more of a partner in the development as they're looking to maybe actualize a part concept and what have you. I think those are really great roles there. I think small businesses are also well equipped to do some of the more novel research, some of the low TRL stuff that's a bit more challenging there. Again, kind of coming back to some of the SIBR stuff. There's a lot of very interesting material alloy development things that are happening right now that people are interested in, and that could be very, very promising. And maybe it's not going to be your company that takes it to TRL 10, but if you can push it above TRL 3 in that 4 or 5 range, and then maybe there's other funding opportunities there, some of the things we were talking about earlier. I think those are some of the great places that that small businesses can play in the additive space.
For sure. And I mean, in reality, all businesses start small, right? So this is a relatively young industry, so it by nature has a core group of small businesses. And it works well for this space because we still have a lot of stuff to figure out. So it's almost essential that you have a nimble and kind of core group of expertise, and then you look to grow on that. So I think each of us in this panel are playing a role in that system, supply chain, however you want to classify it. We need workforce, we need finishing expertise, we need machines to be able to complete the jobs we need to do. But there's a lot of I mean, if you look in this audience, there's a lot of small businesses out there because this is still a new space. I mean, 30 years is a long time from the original IP, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's a very short time. So, you know, again, I think there's huge opportunity. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about the marketplace. The marketplace in the last, you know, if you're following kind of the M&A activity and other investment activity from you know, more the financial markets, this space continues to be incredibly interesting. I mean, so for a while it was a hotbed of investment coming into the space, and everyone's very bullish on the technology. Now we see a lot of consolidation happening in the space generally. So it's exciting to watch. I mean, it's exciting to be a part of as well, but it is definitely a lot of movers and shakers happening. And most of them have a tendency to be in the smaller business side of things.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I want to add to what Justin and Tracy said is the just the ability to be really agile and sort of open to change. So we do, you know, for us to do a custom system is not a huge deal for us because we don't have a huge production line where, you know, anytime you make a change, it can really throw anything off. So if someone needs a, you know, custom technology, custom size, they need a hole that's cut in the side so they can have some type of sensor or system that is going to run through it. You know, for us, we can do that because we're small and we're agile, and we can adjust our production line if we need to. So I think that's one of the benefits of working with a small business is the ability to do those customizations and agility and innovations without necessarily all the overhead or the expense that sometimes would come with a larger entity.
I would just add to that you still need to be sure that the inventors who are coming to you actually you have to evaluate what the potential of the idea is. And in both companies, spent a long time, you know, working on things that I should have done more research on before I got, you know, too far in. But you're exactly right. The small shops are where you can take a risk, whereas a big company can't. But you reach a point where you really have to, once you have so many people with seemingly good ideas, you do have to do a little bit of background and due diligence to be sure that it's something that's going to have a future.
We do have a question in here from the Makes EWD director. You know, we've heard from this panel that workforce is an issue, especially for a lot of these small, medium manufacturers. Josh is going to talk some more tomorrow about tools that they are working on, but he wants to know specifically what are some of the unique issues that you are hearing individually, each of you, you know, within your own operations.
I can speak to apprenticeships. It is no small feat to get a registered apprenticeship. And it was only because of my relationship with IBM and Jennifer Odo, who is now the director of the Manufacturing Center and Skills Accelerator at Youngstown State University, who helped me push that through. And Youngstown State is our sponsor. But it was far more challenging. I spent 9 months I could have had a baby in that time. I spent 9 months trying to get a registered apprenticeship in my state of New Mexico. And they're not worse than other states because I have worked with other states as well. And the bureaucracy and the difficulty of it. And I think that Josh is doing a great job of trying to streamline that. Our registered apprenticeship for 3D printing technicians is based on a framework that America Makes developed with the Urban Institute and I think Youngstown State and a whole other group of people. I'm not sure who else. But because it had already been approved, putting through our registered apprenticeship was so much easier. And so the groundwork that America Makes laid for that, but it still isn't easy, and it was a lot of work to get through the paperwork. Jennifer and her team was able to push through our USDOL apprenticeship in about 2 months. And part of that was because IBM had an embedded person in the USDOL office in Washington, D.C. And when I was stuck on the forms, and I'm not a uneducated person. I can read, and these forms were so challenging. And I would call him and say, I'm stuck on line, 37, or I called Jennifer, she'd call him, and he'd say, okay, I'm going to walk down the hall to the guy who knows the answer to that. But not all of us have those resources. And I think the fact that America Makes and Josh's team are putting serious effort into that is an important step. And for those of you who don't know, registered apprenticeships, like in Europe, are paid training where the intent is that the person stays with you. So it's not that like interns where they, come for a summer, you never see them again. It's really intent upon the person staying in the job. There's a 94, I think, % retention rate among apprentices. It's typically somewhere between 6 months and 2 years, depending upon the program. USDOL sets, I believe, the rate that you have to pay. So for our people in New Mexico, which is a poor state, our starting salary for a technician is $60,000 with no college. And for the apprentices, they start at 2/3 of that, which is $40,000. And they get all of our digital badges for free. We get the IBM IT badges. We were able, again, through America Makes, to get additive badges through and certifications through Tooling U and SME. And these students my 2 apprentices, I'm sorry to go on and on, but I'm so passionate about this. My 2 apprentices are displaced COVID workers. So they lost their jobs during COVID, were on unemployment, had degrees where they couldn't get any meaningful work, and now are on a career path to work in additive. And we have 2 more coming in early 2022, and thanks to the efforts of America Makes and Youngstown State, I can't tell you how wonderful these programs are. So anyway, and if you want more information, just text or chat to me, and I'll send you our framework. And I'm sure Josh would be happy to do that as well.
I guess I could give a little bit of perspective from someone actually who has 2 open positions, by the way. In a former life, I worked at a very large publicly traded company, and the reality was, if you hired someone at that company and they didn't work out, you could kind of bury them in some role that didn't really disrupt things too much, and not to worry too much about direct costs and making sure those people were direct contributors and all that sort of thing. Well, that cause and effect situation is basically impossible to do as a small business, where not only do you wear multiple hats, but the true definition of working as a team will make or break your organization on a daily basis. So when there are a small group of you and the cultural fit and the the expectations of one another are not clearly defined, it can really be a recipe for disaster. So more so than finding people with the right expertise, it's a combination of finding the right cultural fit, and then also ensuring that your risk exposure is not too high. For example, I'm talking about bringing in people from different states and paying for moves and all those sorts of things. It's a really challenging proposition to find someone with excellent expertise and then realize you have to bring them to the West Coast and they've never lived in Ohio before, and it's gray 210 days a year, whatever it is. So there's a whole lot of things to think about, not just from, gee, I need somebody with additive expertise. I'd actually almost prefer someone without additive expertise that has more expertise just around manufacturing, quality, inspection, that sort of thing, because we can teach the additive part of it. And I know the systems are not incredibly straightforward, but they are definitely user-friendly in most cases. So I think that's the real crux of the problem, at least from our perspective, is finding someone with enough experience, but not too much experience, because we're in a space where we have to pave the road. We have to create new processes. So, we can't just accept people who are just going to follow the set of directions, because we still have to create the directions. So it's a unique combination of needing that expertise, but also needing an inherent willingness to not know what the answer is on any given day, but have the fortitude to say, it's okay, we will solve the problem. I don't know how, but we are going to solve the problem. So that's the real hard part of that. I find myself asking a lot of personality questions in interviews, less than, do you know how to run, an FDM machine, or do you know what materials we print in? Like, okay, I can teach you all that stuff. It's harder to find, and this is probably not different than any other position really, but finding that right combination is a challenge, and it can be can unfortunately be a costly mistake, right? So,
I would interject with that. I did, before I started this program, I interviewed 200 employers in manufacturing because we work not only in additive, but with robotics and AI and lasers. And I spoke to, most of them were my customers, so it was easy to contact people over a 6-month period, who ranged from Fortune 10, so Boeing, GM, Apple, all the big guys, GE, down to startups. And 95% of the 200 people I spoke with in manufacturing said that the #1 job skill they needed for operators and technicians was problem solving. The #2 thing they said was hands-on kinds of experience, not necessarily with a particular technology, but just being able to build things. And then finally they got to digital things like CAD design and computer operations, stuff like that. And part of my interest in the digital badge program that we developed was the portfolio aspect. So as an employer, how do I see problem solving? You can ask them a lot of questions, but unless you really can verify that. And so our badges have a portfolio. The person earning the badge has to identify a problem, either at school, work, play, sports, in their lives or in the world, and develop a solution to the problem. And it's documented in their portfolios. So our digital badge earners' portfolios are then stored in a system that adheres to the international badge standards. So there's a degree of assurance that if they say they got the badge, they did. And through that portfolio, as an employer, can see how they solve the problem. And in my own company, I've had, badge earners who take shortcuts to solve the problem, in order to avoid really getting to come to a good solution. And you see that right away because it's documented with photographs and video if it's a functional piece. And I think we need to move education more to a place where it is competency-based and not degree-based. And so if I have some piece of paper that I bring in, what does that really say? And in this day and age, degrees are so complex. How do I know what an electrical engineer does anymore? I mean, there's so many variations within our degree system. And if we can have something where a portfolio can go to an employer and the student shares it. Now, the employer or a college administrator, if they're applying to higher ed, can see exactly what that person's problem-solving skills were. And I think we need a really radical change in how we hire. And I also think that the White House in 2020 was really onto something. Ginny Rometty from IBM, who coined the term "new collar," was on the White House Workforce Task Force with Tim Cook from Apple and a number of other executives. And the White House issued an executive order requiring that all of the government agencies reevaluate how they hire people. And that is huge. I mean, they're a giant employer. We're seeing it here at Los Alamos. They have, I think, 5,000 jobs open in the next couple of years. And they said 4,000 of those they're reevaluating to not require college degrees. And that has to trickle down to our HR departments and to our hiring. Small business doesn't have HR departments, startups don't, but to how we hire people. And instead of just looking at a degree, really starting to think through what is it that these potential employee is bringing to the ballgame, and how did they get those, and what skills do they have? So more of a skills-based evaluation.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Josh, for spurring that conversation. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, the one that we have with 5 votes. As small and medium manufacturers and businesses, what challenges have you found in supplying AM parts or services to the federal government outside of your SBIRs and STTRs, which are essentially direct contracts? What are some of the issues, stumbling blocks, holdups you've had with dealing with the federal government?
So I guess jump in first on that one. So outside of SBIRs and STTRs, I think it's extremely difficult for small businesses to deal directly with the government. The lens to look through it, I think, is not all that different. In our case, we've never won an SBIR that didn't have an advocate already in the organization. You don't win, and I'll say there's a caveat there that I think AFWorks is doing a really good job here with their quick $50,000 open calls. You can get a lot more open proposals through that way. But trying to get an open proposal on something that wasn't maybe had you in mind a little bit already it's very, very difficult, even if your solution is perhaps very well suited for it. And I think if you expand that to getting some sort of other government contract, there's a lot that goes into getting a government contract. The compliance dynamics and just even understanding the ecosystem is very, very challenging. I'm sure Melanie can add this here, because I know they do some work in there. I mean, trying to find the right people and the right program offices is extremely challenging. There's a couple other comments, questions, how could these things be aided or what have you. I think having a better matchmaking service for transitioning a phase 1 to a phase 2 where you need an MOU, that would be a massive benefit. And I truthfully don't really know of a lot of contract vehicles outside the SBIRs and the STTRs that are really going to be accessible to small businesses.
I would agree. So currently, the majority of the products that we're shipping on a regular basis right now are going to the tier 1 OEM. So we're subcontracting behind them. And when our purchase contract through the subcontract to the government is a 200-page purchase order for $5,000 worth of parts or whatever the total is. It's a whole new level of organization required to meet all of the Q clauses and the, even logging into the basic systems alone to generate shipments, which are not done automatically. I mean, these are all automated systems, is like a full-time job in itself. So in the last 2 years, we've spent a lot of time purely trying to muddle our way through learning that and figuring all that out. So that's a big job, actually, especially from a company who historically, when at the founding of RP&M, we were creating prototypes and we'd accept credit cards and ship parts the next day. it's a totally different system. So the challenges are probably numerous. We're working our way through them. And again, I'm speaking from a once removed situation. So, but you know, if whomever our customer happens to be, and you could think of a couple of defense OEMs, those guys are flowing down all of the subcontract and DFARS terms to us that they sign up for. So that's how they eliminate their risk, by saying, if we have to do this, you guys have to do it. And so, you know, but from my perspective, that's right where we want to be, right? So again, kind of pushing the additive technology into a mainstream manufacturing technology. And in terms of solving those problems, what it takes is just fortitude and a lot of reading. And again, you know, we have to create a process to accept that kind of work. So in some cases, you know, there are certain customers that are requiring additional stuff from us, and that stuff may be CMMC, it may be digital product definition, and how are you controlling data? And so for a company with not a whole lot of infrastructure systems around it, you could partly say, well, that's easier to control because there's fewer of you, and your systems are not as expansive. However, you still have to set up controls around all of that. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. However, that's what's enabled us to grow, and so we've worked towards just figuring that out, honestly.
Been any particular resources or anything that you utilize, like your local SBDC, anyone like that, that's helped guide you through the process, or has this all been done internally?
I wish there was a way that we had gotten help, but no. The first couple of transactions that we did, we had very, very patient procurement agents that were willing to work with us, and quite frankly, there weren't a lot of options for them that were in terms of qualified suppliers, and so the onus was kind of on them to make it work also, and so we worked through it. I think we've grown up a lot in the last couple of years around that, but it's not rocket science. No, it's not rocket science, but it does just take a little bit more than, like I said, your standard, you know, maybe inventor calling you with his Visa number to order a part. It's just maybe a little bit more complicated than that. So
I would add to that. I was just going to say, I would add to that we were located, Potomac Photonics was located, as you would guess, on the Potomac River. And so we were in the DC area where there were a large number of Beltway bandits. And a whole industry grew up around the Beltway bandits to help people with the procurement process, and particularly with setting up the DCAA and the contract auditing processes. And so they were a huge help, and they were not, in those days at least, all that expensive. And we ended up hiring a guy through one of these contractors who, I don't know how we could have survived. I mean, we had 16 phase 2 SBIRs over a 10-year period. And it was just a huge help. And I don't know if that still exists, but there might be some people out there who have that expertise. And they were typically people who came from the agencies, so they knew the ins and outs pretty well. One guy we worked with was a former DCAA auditor, and so he really knew what to look for, and was a huge help to us.
Two things to add to, I think, Tracy and Sarah's comments there. I think going back to Tracy's comment about the 200-page terms and conditions, I think you do have to. I understand why a lot of these things exist, and they need to exist, right? But when you've won a few government contracts, you're going to get at some point audited, which means you've got to have all of your costing in full detail, right? So I can't quote a small, roughly $1,200 job without making sure we've got a complete detailed costing, and we have our clear overhead and profit limits and all that sort of stuff. And it's fine as long as it's leading somewhere else, but like that's a barrier, and that's a dynamic that you can't just I think Sarah's kind of commented on it. You can't just sort of slowly walking into it. You got to dive in, right? And I think also, if you're going to dive in, you do need to have somebody, and it's another barrier, right? You probably need to employ somebody full time who does that. I mean, it's what we did. We pulled in somebody who ran the program for NAVC for a number of years, right? And without him, there's no way we'd be able to navigate all the regulations and things like that. It really is. It's a great opportunity. It's a great vehicle if you can do it, but you need to be able to fund it for a little while and see where it can go. And I think Melanie's been trying to jump in here.
Melanie?
Yeah, and
We have about 10
To-
minutes left.
to
and
just-
if you-
advocates, I think once you have the government straightforward to then they introduce you to other people. First sense of
It's very challenging, and we've been successful in one branch of the government in terms of finding the right people and getting advocacy, but now we're trying to branch into other parts, and that's really challenging too, as we're
we're trying
government and
it's necessary.
branches, and so that's when Justin and I sometimes talk to each other and say,
Hey, I'm doing this, or any of your customers interested, and vice versa. And I think as small businesses and large businesses, we have to help each other out in that sense, because it is challenging to find the right people in the government to do work with, whether it's an SBIR. I mean, those are a little bit different, but you still really need an advocate or a level of support typically, or someone to sort of help you identify what's going to be most meaningful for them. And then outside of the SBIR, it's even more challenging. So I think if there's a way to have more opportunities like AFWorks has been doing, and now there's some of these competitions sort of coming online where you have a opportunity to present technology to maybe a new group of people. Those type of events and programs have been really useful to us just in terms of getting exposure. But ultimately it started by finding the right advocate, and the path to get to that advocate was very obscure, and it will probably be different for everyone.
Yeah, and I'd add, just, I promise nobody paid me to say this. I've never met an unhelpful government procurement agent or technical lead. I mean, they're all amazingly helpful. Getting to them is a challenge, and also getting some of their time is a challenge, because like everybody else, they're very, very busy. They're getting pulled in a million different directions. So it's never like, that's not the issue. So the issue isn't a desire to help. It's finding your way to that individual or individuals, and then making those connections. That's very, very challenging. But I will say that the America Makes dynamic has been super useful for us. Like, I've made very meaningful contacts at the Air Force, and some of those advocates that I found have been via these sorts of vehicles and these sorts of technology exchanges. And I think that is really a great path as well. Perpetuating these sort of interchanges where there's meaningful dialogue, not just commercialization, what have you. That has a lot of value.
I was going to say that all of our advocates came out because of our technical contact. Our inventor of our technology, Dr. Paul Christensen, was a leader in the laser field and spoke at every conference. And either he or I, and this is in the days when it was true technical.
Okay. Hear me? Did we lose Stephanie?
Nope, I'm still here.
And that we could, he knew everyone. And one or the other of us always was at a technical conference, always learning from the potential advocates, but also sharing what we were doing. And I think the thing is to really have somebody.
Okay, I will read. Looks like there's some other Q&A we can maybe hit before the end of the panel. Let's see, this question says, and I think we've already hit it a little bit, but I think Justin and Tracy, maybe you guys will have more. What policies, programs, or dollars would be best deployed to increase adoption of your technology into the supply chain? Quick hits and long-term plays.
Can everyone hear Melanie? Did everyone catch that question?
Yes.
Okay. I have some disconnect here, but if anyone would like to grab that question, if there's anything that you've had within your organization that you thought has been beneficial as far as policies, dollars, anything that helped long-term expansion and growth, anything that you've received in the past that has been helpful that you're willing to talk about.
It's probably somewhat, I don't think this is a new thought, right? But if contracting speed and selection of contracts could be increased, that'd be very beneficial. I think to the Air Force Service we're working on right now, I think they were awarded about 9 months beyond the expected time frame, which is great. We're happy they were rewarded, but you almost have to go back and propose and say, all right, well, what were we going to do again? Because so much time has passed, from the actual point of submission. Some of the cross agency funding dynamics are, I think, a little more challenging than maybe they should be. When you do have a situation where you've got an award and another agency wants to help fund it, some of the hoops you got to jump through to prove that and to get your matching funding they're quite involved. So I think anything that could be done to simplify those dynamics, understanding again that small businesses don't have some of the flexibility and don't have some of the background administrative support that large agencies do. That'd be my ad.
Yeah, I think timing is definitely tough. I mean, and again, more of the business transition thing. And again, we're once removed, or our customer isn't directly the government; it's a company in between us. But it's caused us to do some just basic changes, like quotes are valid for a year. I mean, 10 years ago in the prototyping industry, our quotes were valid for 10 days. So, holding and creating a system for holding onto files for an inordinate amount of time after, if you've actually produced an order, because now, thankfully, you're probably approved for whatever program that have bid on and produced, and so the likelihood of getting that again is high. So there's a lot of just system and changes that we've made, and again, as Justin mentioned, the timelines are quite different than what we were used to. So but I think that also scales with the potential and the revenue, quite honestly, for that sort of work. So, if you're bidding on a program that could use half of your capacity for a year, it probably isn't going to show up as a purchase contract the next day. So.
It looks like maybe we have time for one more question. So the next one in the Q&A is the cost of qualification and verification machines is quite high. And the person that writes this, they are a service-disabled veteran-owned small business employing vets. Are there any suggestions on how they spread their qualification and verification costs?
The answer to that is going to be highly dependent on the technology that you're using and the specification that you're trying to achieve. As additive systems go, FDM is considered one of the lesser expensive in general, more widespread, I would say. But qualification is no joke, and it is incredibly expensive. So, we were of the good fortune to be able to lead a program around this, and so that kind of was our foray into much of the work that we're doing that was funded by America Makes and others. So there's, that's definitely a way to do that. You can also, it depends on your situation, but if certain suppliers are in the case where they don't have a broad enough supply chain, then I'd encourage you to get creative and ask them to figure out a way to help fund it. The reality is if they're a big company and they have money and they don't have enough of a supply chain base, the U.S. government incents big companies to work with small businesses for a reason. If you're a disabled veteran and running a business, there's fund allocations that have to happen for businesses like yours. So I guess, I'd encourage you to take a look at those. But you're right. What does qualification and verification mean? It means that you can prove that you've done something and you have a process control that allows you to do it many, many times over and over again. So the only way to prove that is by doing something many, many times all over again, and then recording the data and proving that your coefficient of variance is as it should be expected. If it's not, then unfortunately you spend a lot of money proving that you don't have a process that's in control. So herein lies the crux of manufacturing, right? So this is kind of the job of all of us as manufacturers, is to figure out how to solve that problem and to do it economically so that you can produce things and make money on it. I mean, that's our goal. So, but I think there are resources out there, especially in this space because it is newer. So, and I'm sure the American Makes team probably has some more input on things like that because that's what they're here for, right? That's what American Makes is here for, is an agency to spur economic development for small businesses to transition into using new manufacturing technologies. So they are your resource for exactly that sort of thing.
I know we had until 2:30. If we have time for one more question, I'll throw that out there. John, up to you.
You want to answer it fast? Sure.
Are there any changes as small business owners that you guys would like to see as it relates to policy or incentives that would allow you to more quickly scale up your businesses?
I wouldn't add anything different. I think it's, contracting time, contracting simplicity, trying to take some of the cost of doing work with the government out would be very nice.
Yeah, and to me, I guess I'm not trying to answer this from a government perspective, but quickly scaling up your business doesn't always mean that your business is successful. So as a pure conservative when it comes to financing and things like that, there's an appropriate time to scale, and incentives to scale doesn't mean that scaling is the right decision. So I guess I'm not overly bullish on this this ideology because there's a right and a wrong time, and the technology has to be right, the financial conditions have to be right, the staffing has to be right, all those things have to be right. And sometimes, we see companies fail because they've gone after things like these incentives to scale up when scaling up maybe wasn't the right decision.
Okay, I would like to thank all four of you for your participation today and joining MMX. So John, back over to you.